and he noticed that there was basically two different kinds of foods. All foods either were foods that did not turn into slime, which he called mucus, or they were foods that would turn into slime.
Who was Arnold Ehret, and what is the mucusless diet healing system that he came up with?
Arnold Ehret, he was diagnosed with what they considered to be an incurable disease. When you say they, we're talking about the burgeoning medical establishment. I wouldn't call it established in the way that it is today, but it was kind of getting its start back then. And this is over in Europe. And he was fairly young and really, really sick. And he wanted to find a remedy. He had a little bit of money from his family, and so he went to a lot of the different places of healers and sort of formal doctors and practitioners at the time, and nobody could heal him. Nobody found any kind of remedy for him. Really, not even any relief in that side. So he started to investigate plant-based healing, and at the time there was the very beginning of a back to nature renaissance. This was really big in Switzerland, Germany. This is the same back to nature renaissance that essentially came to America, to Southern California, developed, and then sort of exploded as a pop cultural phenomenon in the 60s, but we can get to that later. But Ehret, basically, he started to check out some of these vegetarian retreats, and there were a number of people kind of pushing fruit diets and all this kind of stuff. And he would go to some of these retreats or some of these practitioners, and he would get a little bit of relief. And it'd be, okay, well, I'm feeling better, but this really isn't doing it. And so it got to the point where he was almost just ready to give up. And so by some kind of, I want to say, intervention or whatever, he just kind of said, you know what, I'm just going to stop eating. I'm not, if I die, I die. Ever, I'm just not going to eat anything. And to his surprise, within 2 weeks, he had started to get a lot better. He was feeling better than he had felt in years. And he noticed, like, wait a minute, I haven't eaten anything and I'm starting to heal. And the brilliance of Ehret, he started kind of putting it together like, okay, well, because he, obviously heard about fasting and things, but nobody had really developed a systematic way to do it. A lot of these different systems, whether you would go to whatever the practitioners were back then, I mean, it's almost as diverse as it is now. You look out there and it's just everybody sort of has their own opinion and has their own book and has their own retreat and all that kind of stuff. And it was kind of like that then. But he just kind of put it together in his head. It's like, okay, well, I think this is what works. This is how you can heal someone. And he noticed that there was basically two different kinds of foods. All foods either were foods that did not turn into slime, which he called mucus, or they were foods that would turn into slime. Once you put it in the body, if you heat it up, it turns into this sort of viscous, gooey substance that we call mucus. And he reasoned, well, wait a minute, then if the slimy food is the food that sort of causes the ailments in me, and then it causes ailments in other people that I see, then is this really human food? Are we supposed to be eating slime-producing, mucus-forming foods? And as he started to, after he healed himself, he opened up, he worked at a couple places where he essentially started to hone his healing methods in the mucusless diet healing system. And he ultimately did have his own sanitariums, one or at least one that was in Europe. And then when he came over to America around that time, it was like World War I. So he intended on going back home, but because of the war, he couldn't. So he had to stay in America, and that's when he hooked up with some of the people he hooked up with in America, Fred Hirsch and Benedict Luss, who he had already worked with a little bit earlier. And so he was just at the forefront of this entire movement. There was a lot of people that was investigating, the raw foodism and fruitarianism and vegetarianism. Of course, the word vegan wasn't invented yet. So essentially, in America, Ehret actually really starts to get fairly popular, especially sort of, again, that back to nature vibe that was going on in Southern California. And he was just sort of became this iconic figure. And toward the end of his life, he was selling out these big rooms where everybody would in that day pay $100 to see him speak, which today that would be like $1,000 or more or something. So he was getting real popular, and and he met a tragic end. Nobody knows for sure what happened. He was leaving a sold out presentation that he had just did, a lecture he had just did. It was totally sold out, killed it. And he was walking across the street, as the story goes, a slick street, had new shoes on, and supposedly fell and fell on the back of his head and had a basal fracture. Nobody saw it, so there's something a little fishy about that. But so then after he did pass, then Fred Hirsch kind of took up the mantle of Erit Publishing, made sure that Erit's work continued to be out there. He opened up a fairly popular retreat, kind of plant-based retreat in it was California, and people like Einstein. I mean, there was a lot of famous people that would go there. Einstein, some other famous actors, and this kind of stuff. And so Erit he's been a figure that elites know about. To this day, people don't realize they sit down at an Apple computer that is directly influenced by the work of Professor Arnold Erit. Steve Jobs was an Erit fiend early in his life, in that real creative period when he was putting that company together. And so, so Erit's really had a major influence, much more so than most people would ever realize or really give him the credit for, because when people read his work, some of the things that he says and the propositions he makes are so controversial that even people that respect him and like him, like, yeah, I really like most of what he says, but there's a few things he says that really gets on people's nerves, and they're just like, oh man, I can't promote him. Certain things he says that just really goes against everything that people like to teach about when it comes, whether you're talking about nutrition or some of these other theories. Real controversial figure, one that they have tried to bury, the historians and the people that, I mean, you shouldn't get out of, a medical history of medicine or a history of naturopathy or anything without, Erit coming up in the discussion. But they've done a good job of, kind of keeping him suppressed because it's so powerful, and you can't get. He doesn't promote a lot of the things that most people in this field make money from selling. Selling the herbs or selling supplements or the vitamins or this or that. And he's not opposed to rational use of herbs, so I get that straight. But focus is always on the diet, transition, and fasting. And then we can sort of talk about what I call the ancillaries, the exercise and the enemas and the whatever it is, all the different, the massage and whatever. We can get into things that can aid the elimination process, but the body heals itself. You can't take something that's going to heal the body. I got into the mucusless diet about 14 years ago, and I was 280 pounds, or I was actually probably about 300 pounds. I was 280 for a long time, and then right before I got into the diet, things got pretty bad. I was way up there. I was real close to 300 pounds, and just suffered from a lot of ailments. I had chronic migraine headaches almost every day, and sleep apnea. I was using a little oxygen mask thing when I was sleeping, and I used to snore real just crazy loud, and just overall bad health. But I didn't know that it could be any different. I thought that it was normal to take pharmaceutical medications every day of my life for the rest of my life, because I'd been taking them since I was 7 years old. Everybody in my family, from my mother who died when I was in 6th grade, and my aunt, and everybody I knew took medicine. So pretty much within 6 months, I lost about 100 pounds and overcame the most intense of those ailments. I stopped using the CPAP unit. I stopped getting sick all the times. I used to just always be sick, just be blowing my nose all the time, and that kind of thing. And so I basically, got over that, and just kept going. I didn't stop. I was like, this is going to be my path, and decided to really go down it and see what's on the other side.
Wow. I guess it would be fitting to go over what are mucus-forming foods? What do you eat on this diet?
The mucusless diet, as a strict definition, would possibly be different from the mucusless diet as a healing system. Mucusless diet healing system. So a mucus-free or mucusless diet strictly would be mucus-free fruits and mucus-free vegetables. And so that is going to basically be the fruits that have the least amount of fat in them, and vegetables that have, basically no starch or no fat associated with them. Those are total mucus-free foods. We don't try to get people to just eat like that right off the bat. That's something a lot of people want to try to put that in their mind, especially if they're coming from some of these other more strict sort of avenues, whether it be there's, certain raw food communities or certain, fruitarian aspirants, and there's these different communities where they're just really strict about a certain principle. like
Yeah.
this principle. If you don't do this, then you're not in the club anymore, you know. And what we try to say is, look, like we're about incremental change and transition. So you're just because you ate some processed vegan food one day, you're not out the club. That's part of your transition. That's part of your relapse process.
Mhm.
If you understand how to transition properly, you keep moving forward. You know, you don't sit there and be all feel sorry for yourself or be hard on yourself or guilty or anything like that. Once you know the principles of the system, you keep moving forward. So that's, you know, all the stuff, your basic, your fruits, your melons and your berries and, you know, it's just all that kind of stuff. The fatty fruits, I'm not, you know, a fan of. Those can be mucus forming, the avocados and all that kind of stuff, which I know that just makes some people cry. They
A lot of
just,
people don't want to hear that.
you know, and it's like I'm not telling you to not eat it just because it can be part of your transition if you eat it properly. I'm just saying be mindful. That's not a mucus-free item, no matter how much you try to make it. I mean, you can, no, but when I ate it, it was like, no, look, it's fine that you eat it, but I'm just saying it's not mucus-free. Because just take the meat of an avocado and take the meat of a watermelon and cook both of them as an experiment, and tell me what happens to the watermelon and what happens to the avocado. The watermelon is so, I mean, it pretty much, you could probably boil it away. There would be so little bit of anything left. But that avocado is going to cook down into a slimy, viscous, mucousy sludge. So, and you can do that with any food item if you really wanted to do your own test to see, well, what is mucus forming and not mucus forming. And it's not meant to be a scientific test. It's just more of an empirical kind of deductive test. If you can kind of, okay, well, I deduce if I cook it down and it turns into slime here, kind of like what you would do with rice. You know, they make bookbinders glue out of rice. Cook rice long enough, it just turns into glue.
Right.
And so it's the same with a lot of other mucus forming foods. So we say mucus forming foods as a umbrella term, but it can further be divided into mucus forming foods and pus forming foods. Pus forming foods indicate any food item that involves dead, decaying flesh or decaying blood, like white blood. That's going to be your meat and your dairy. Those are pus forming, and pus is a very concentrated form of mucus. You know, if you use, you know, mucus as the umbrella term, so it's very concentrated, and that's why, you know, it's so dangerous to eat it. And that is one of the items that we say, you know, get off of as soon as you can. Now, even with me, you know, it took me a while to totally get off of meat. You know, there was a couple months where I was still kind of eating it a little bit, and I really wasn't totally committed to the system yet, and I wasn't doing all the different components of the mucus diet healing system. But once I got kind of past those couple months, I was cool for a while, yet I still wasn't out of the woods. You know, I would kind of go back every now and then. So it took me about a total of 6 months where I was totally meat and dairy free. Okay. So I say that just to get in perspective, because a lot of people I work with, most people I work with, I mean, they were able to get off of meat and dairy faster than I did, which is beautiful. I'll tell my story just so if it's hard for you to not get discouraged, you just got to keep working the system, and eventually you'll get there, because as long as those poisons are still in your system, you're going to crave them. But as soon as you really get rid of that stuff out of you, then you'll no longer crave those poisons, and you'll get to the point where if you try to eat it, it'll make you sick. And you'll know. You eat it, it's just like, okay, that was a bad idea. So that's the pus forming. The mucus forming foods are going to be your starchy vegetables and fatty fruits or fatty vegetables, you know, anything in that vegetable world that's like that. Now, with the mucusless diet, we're not hardcore about the raw, like, say, you know, sort of a raw foodist would be. Within the mucusless diet healing system, you combine raw and cooked, particularly mucus-free cooked items, to advance yourself down the path to get cleaner and cleaner and get to higher levels, so that you can eventually get to where you can really sustain a truly, if you so desire, where you really can sustain a mucus-free raw diet. It's always about kind of going through these different periods. Like, you don't have to sustain one thing forever. You know, you hit the mucus-free period, you fast for a little bit, take a step back and might have to eat some transitional meals. You know, it's just sort of using all of these different components as you need to. It's not an easy path, but what I realized was you can either go through these eliminations at a younger age now, or you can wait until you're sort of the last 10 years of your life, or when you're waiting on your deathbed to kind of go through them. I would prefer to go through it with a little younger body and go through it now. But you'll start going through illnesses that you probably would have had, or not even probably, that you would have had. They would have expressed themselves later down the road differently. I mean, I've gone through things that I was like, man, I feel like I'm like a day where I just feel elderly or something. Like, what? It's just an elimination. Then the next day I'm back to feeling like a kid again, you know. But that is sort of the art and the science of this whole cleansing process, and we're reconstructing our bloodstream and our physiology. The emotional component, because that's a whole other subject, but it's not really. It's all hooked into this, because as you start to cleanse and fast, a lot of your old emotional stuff comes up. Be ready to have your life transformed. I mean, if you're not ready to be transformed, then this probably isn't the path for you, or at least you're not ready yet. But the open-mindedness and the willingness to really transform, if it's kind of the prerequisite going down this journey.